The rain was falling in slow, steady sheets outside Michael Jordan's Charlotte home, the kind of Sunday weather that makes you want to stay indoors and wander through old memories. Boxes were stacked in the corner of his office. Keepsakes he hadn't opened in decades. He had told himself for years he'd go through them one day, and today, apparently, was that day. "Hey, Marcus," Michael called, his deep voice echoing in the quiet house. His 19-year-old son jogged in, a basketball still bouncing in his hand. "What's up, Dad?" Michael grinned and held up a thick, dust-covered book. "My senior yearbook. Want to see how skinny your old man used to be?" They sat side by side on the leather couch, the soft patter of rain against the windows their only soundtrack. Michael flipped past the sports section, page after page of young athletes frozen in time, his own photo among them, looking more boy than man. Then he turned to the cheerleading section, and his hand froze mid-flip. There she was, front row, center, bright smile, blue and gold uniform, blonde hair catching the light like it had its own spotlight. Jessica Miller. Michael's finger traced the edge of her picture without realizing it. For a moment, he wasn't Michael Jordan. Six-time NBA champion, global icon, billionaire. He was just Mike, a tall, skinny teenager from Wilmington, North Carolina, whose heart used to race whenever Jessica walked into the room. "Dad? Who's that?" Marcus leaned in, curious. Michael hesitated. "Jessica Miller," he said quietly. "Someone I knew back then." "Knew how? Like, you dated her?" Michael almost laughed. "Nah, definitely not. So what happened?" Michael stared at the photo, the sound of rain fading behind the memory rushing back. "I asked her to the school dance. She said no." Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Wait, she rejected you? You, Michael Jordan?" Michael smiled faintly. "Marcus, I wasn't Michael Jordan back then. I was just some kid who'd been cut from the varsity team as a sophomore. To her, I was nobody special." He closed the book, but not before stealing one more glance at Jessica's frozen smile. That was 40 years ago, and yet something about seeing her face again made his chest tighten. He had no idea that reopening that chapter of his past would take him somewhere he never expected, and change how he thought about winning and losing forever. Jessica Miller wasn't just another face in Michael's yearbook. She was the kind of person who seemed untouchable in high school. Everyone knew her name. Everyone knew that smile. She wasn't only beautiful. She had the kind of confidence that made her seem to glide through life without ever stumbling. She was captain of the cheerleading squad, voted most likely to brighten your day in the yearbook's superlatives, and dating Tommy Patterson, the star quarterback who seemed to own the school cafeteria every lunch period. Back then, Michael was still trying to figure out who he was. He'd grown a few inches, but he was all elbows and knees. He had dreams of basketball glory, sure, but those dreams felt fragile in 1981. His sophomore year, he'd been cut from varsity, an embarrassment that still burned in the back of his mind. He wasn't the guy everyone stopped to greet in the hallway. He was just Mike Jordan, the tall kid from biology class who sometimes sat alone at lunch. But Jessica? She was everything he wasn't. Popular, outgoing, and fearless in a way that made people gravitate toward her. She was the kind of girl who could make a shy kid feel seen with nothing more than a smile in the hallway. And for Michael, those rare moments when she said, "Hey Mike," as they passed were enough to make his day. It wasn't that he thought she'd ever date him, not seriously. But when the spring dance was announced, something shifted. Maybe it was the fact that his game was improving on the court. Maybe it was the encouragement of a couple of friends who told him, "What's the worst she can say? No?" Or maybe it was simply that teenage mix of hope and adrenaline that pushes you to take a chance. He spent a week working up the nerve. He rehearsed lines in front of the bathroom mirror, changed his shirt twice that morning, and timed his walk into the cafeteria so it looked casual, not like he'd been psyching himself up for days. Jessica was sitting at her usual table, a mix of cheerleaders, football players, and kids who didn't have to worry about fitting in because they already did. She was mid-laugh when she noticed him standing there. "Hey, Jessica," Michael said, his voice cracking on the second syllable. She smiled in that easy, friendly way. "Oh, hi, Mike." "There's a dance next Friday," he began, forcing the words out before his courage evaporated. "I was wondering if, maybe, you'd like to go with me?" For a moment the table went silent. Michael could feel the weight of every eye on him. Jessica's cheeks flushed as she glanced at her friends. "That's really sweet," she said carefully, "but I'm already going with Tommy." Michael's stomach dropped. "Oh, right, of course." Maybe some other time, she added quickly, though they both knew that was just a kindness to soften the blow. He nodded, forcing a smile, and turned to walk away, feeling like the entire cafeteria was still watching his humiliation. That moment became one of those small but sharp memories that never completely fade. It wasn't the rejection itself that stuck with him. It was the vulnerability of putting himself out there and the awkward sting of knowing she didn't see him the way he hoped. Back then, it felt like a closed door, but as he sat with Marcus on that rainy Sunday decades later, flipping through the yearbook, Michael didn't see that moment as a loss anymore. In fact, he realized he'd never really wondered what happened to Jessica after graduation. It was March of 1981, and the air inside Laney High School buzzed with the energy of spring. Baseball season was starting, graduation was on the horizon for the seniors, and the upcoming spring dance was the hot topic in every hallway. Michael had been thinking about asking Jessica for weeks, not in a maybe I will, maybe I won't kind of way, but in the way you think about something every single night before bed and every morning before class. It was a steady drumbeat in his mind. Just do it. What's the worst that can happen? The truth was, Michael had already mapped out the moment in his head. A smooth, confident walk across the cafeteria, a casual invitation, maybe even a laugh or two. It would be quick, easy, and harmless. But reality has a way of making the simplest plans feel like climbing a mountain. That Tuesday, the lunchroom smelled faintly of pizza and fries, the kind of smell that would cling to your clothes the rest of the day. Michael was sitting with two of his basketball buddies, pushing a carton of chocolate milk around his tray, when he spotted Jessica at her usual table. She was leaning over to whisper something to her best friend, her ponytail swinging. Every now and then, she laughed in that bright, open way that made people turn their heads. He felt his heart rate pick up. His palms were damp. "You gonna ask her or not?" one of his friends muttered, smirking. Michael swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm gonna do it." He stood up before his nerves could sabotage him. Each step toward Jessica's table felt heavier than the last. It was as if the chatter in the cafeteria faded, replaced by the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. When he finally reached the table, Jessica looked up, her blue eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Oh, hi, Mike," she said, her voice light and friendly. "Hey, Jessica," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. There's a dance next Friday. I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go with me?" The words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. Her smile faltered just enough for Michael to notice. She glanced quickly at Tommy Patterson, who was sitting 2 seats away, his arm draped over the back of another chair. Then she looked back at Michael. "That's really sweet," she began, her tone careful, almost apologetic. "But I'm already going with Tommy." It was exactly the answer Michael had feared, but hearing it out loud still stung. "Oh, right, of course," he said, forcing a small laugh as if it didn't matter. Jessica added quickly, "Maybe some other time," a phrase that sounded like kindness on the surface but felt like a soft closing of a door. Michael nodded and stepped back, acutely aware of the eyes watching him from around the table. The walk back to his seat seemed longer than it should have been. He didn't dare look at his friends. He just sat down and took a sip of his chocolate milk, which now tasted bitter. The moment lasted less than a minute, but for 17-year-old Michael, it was a defining one. It wasn't just about Jessica. It was about the courage it took to risk looking foolish. It was about learning that sometimes, no matter how much you hope for something, it won't go the way you imagined. In the days that followed, Michael avoided lingering too close to the cheerleader's table. He still said hi when Jessica passed him in the hall, and she still smiled in that effortless way, but there was now a thin layer of polite distance between them. Years later, as Michael sat with Marcus flipping through that yearbook, the memory returned not with the sting it once carried, but with a strange sense of gratitude. Back then, that no had felt like the end of something, an opportunity cut short before it began. Now it seemed more like a pivot point, one of those invisible nudges that push you toward the life you're meant to have. Still, there was one thing he realized he had never done in all those years: wonder what became of Jessica Miller after high school. And on that rainy Sunday afternoon, staring at her picture in the cheerleading section, he realized he was about to change that. For the rest of that rainy afternoon, Michael tried to focus on other boxes: old practice jerseys, newspaper clippings from his UNC days, photographs from early NBA seasons. But the yearbook kept pulling his eyes back to that one page: Jessica Miller. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something heavier. At 60 years old, Michael had spent his life chasing greatness, breaking records, collecting trophies. He'd built an empire and earned a fortune. But staring at that frozen high school smile, he realized he knew almost nothing about someone who had once meant so much in such a short, quiet way. "You're thinking about her," Marcus said, catching him staring at the yearbook again. Michael smirked. "You think you know me that well?" "I know that look," Marcus replied. "You're wondering what happened to her." Michael closed the book. "I guess I am. I've never thought about it before, but yeah, I'm curious." "You could probably find out in 5 minutes," Marcus said, tossing his basketball from hand to hand. Michael laughed. "5 minutes, huh? Dad, you're Michael Jordan. You could find anybody." That night, after Marcus had gone home to his own apartment, Michael sat alone in his office with his laptop open. The rain had stopped, leaving the air outside still and quiet. He typed her name into the search bar, Jessica Miller, and hit enter. The first results were useless. Social media accounts that didn't look right, LinkedIn profiles for people in other states, a few random articles about unrelated people with the same name. He added filters. North Carolina, Laney High School, 1981. Still nothing solid. For an hour, he clicked link after link, reading through alumni pages and local community bulletins, and he almost gave up, until one small headline caught his eye. Local teacher honored for dedication to special needs students. Michael clicked. The article was from a Wilmington newspaper, dated 6 months earlier. As soon as the photo loaded, his chest tightened. It was her. Older, hair now streaked with gray, but still with that unmistakable smile. The caption read, "Jessica Miller Thompson, 1981 graduate of Laney High School, recognized for 20 years of service to students with developmental disabilities." He read on. She had dedicated her life to teaching children with special needs, often staying late, coming in on weekends, using her own money for supplies. The principal called her irreplaceable. The article also mentioned something that made Michael sit back in his chair, stunned. Jessica had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2015. Despite the disease's progression, she refused to take disability leave. She still came to work every day, cane in hand, determined to give her students the education they deserved. Michael leaned back, staring at her picture. The woman who had once seemed so far out of reach was now fighting a battle that most people never saw, and yet her eyes in the photograph shone with the same light he remembered from high school. Then he saw one more detail, one that turned curiosity into resolve. The article mentioned budget cuts that threatened to shut down her school's special education program. 23 children, each with unique challenges, could lose the teacher who believed in them most. Michael closed the laptop slowly. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to just read about Jessica Miller and move on. Not this time. Michael didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Jessica's picture from the article appeared. Older, yes, but with the same spark in her eyes that had stopped him in his tracks 40 years ago. He kept thinking about the sentence buried near the end of the article. Due to budget constraints, the district may be forced to consolidate programs, which could result in the closure of the special education department at New Hanover Elementary. He knew what consolidate meant in school district language. It meant cutting. It meant telling kids who needed more that they'd have to make do with less, and it meant teachers like Jessica, who fought every day for those kids, would lose their positions. The next morning, Michael called one of his oldest friends in Wilmington, Kenny Simmons, who'd been his teammate at Laney and still lived in town. "Kenny, you remember Jessica Miller?" Michael asked, without preamble. Kenny laughed. "You mean the Jessica Miller? Every guy in school remembers her. Why?" "I found an article about her. Says she's teaching special needs kids and the school might cut her program. You know anything about that?" Kenny's tone changed. "Yeah, it's real. She's been at it for years, Mike. Everybody loves her. But the district's been bleeding money. I heard they're talking about shutting the program down at the end of the year." Michael drummed his fingers against the desk. "How's she doing? Personally?" Kenny hesitated. "Truth? She's not in great shape. MS has been hitting her hard lately. But she won't quit. She says the kids need her." Michael felt that same knot in his chest tighten. "You think she'd remember me?" Kenny chuckled. "Oh, she'd remember you. I don't think she's forgotten any of us. But Mike, She's not the cheerleader anymore. She's been through some stuff. Michael stared at the rain-streaked window. So have I. After hanging up, he found himself pacing. This wasn't just a matter of curiosity anymore. It was something deeper. A mix of guilt, respect, and an almost protective instinct. Back in high school, he had built her up in his mind as this perfect, untouchable figure. Now he saw her for what she truly was, a fighter. By midday, Michael had made a decision. He called his assistant. I need you to arrange a meeting with the principal at New Hanover Elementary in Wilmington, quietly, no press. May I ask why? She said. I want to talk about saving a program they're about to cut, and I want to see someone I knew a long time ago. 2 days later, Michael was sitting in a modest school office that smelled faintly of crayons and disinfectant. The principal, a warm but exhausted-looking woman named Linda Harris, shook his hand like she still couldn't believe he was there. I can't tell you what this means, she said. Jessica's work here, I've never seen anything like it. She's the kind of teacher who changes the trajectory of a child's life. Tell me what you need to keep the program open, Michael said simply. Linda blinked. Well, it's not just a matter of money, it's staffing, resources. I'm not saying I can fix everything, Michael interrupted gently, but I can make sure money isn't the reason these kids lose their teacher. For the next hour, they talked numbers, schedules, and what the program would need to survive. By the end, Michael had committed to funding the program for the next 5 years, no strings attached. As they shook hands, Linda smiled. Jessica doesn't know you're here, does she? No, Michael said, and I'd like to keep it that way for now. That afternoon, Michael sat in his rental car outside the school, watching through the rain-speckled windshield as kids spilled out for recess. Then he saw her, walking slowly, cane in hand, but still standing tall, her laughter carrying across the playground. For a moment, he was 17 again, watching her from a distance, too unsure to walk up and say what he felt. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't a kid with nothing to offer. He stayed until the last child went inside, then drove away without introducing himself. Not yet. Some meetings are worth waiting for. The plan was simple, or at least it looked that way on paper. Fund the program quietly, give the PIABs, principal the resources she needed, and let Jessica continue her work without the threat of losing her classroom hanging over her. But Michael wasn't built to play from the sidelines forever. 2 weeks later, Linda Harris called him with an idea. We're hosting an assembly next Friday for Exceptional Children's Week. It's a celebration for our special needs program. We were going to cancel it because of the budget situation, but now, thanks to you, we can make it a celebration for a very different reason. Michael smiled. You want me to be there? I want you to be the one to tell Jessica the news, Linda said. I think it would mean more coming from you. Michael agreed instantly. The morning of the assembly, the school gym buzzed with kids, parents, and staff. Posters lined the walls with hand-painted slogans like, "Every child matters and learning looks different for everyone." The folding chairs were filled with families who knew firsthand what it meant to fight for resources. Backstage, Michael stood in a simple black suit, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Nervous. Not the good kind of nervous before a game, when adrenaline sharpened his focus. This was different. This was personal. When the assembly began, Linda took the microphone. She spoke about the challenges the program had faced, the uncertainty of its future, and the resilience of the teachers and students. Then, she turned toward the audience. Before I share the big news, I want to take a moment to recognize the heart and soul of this program. Someone who has given 20 years of her life to making sure every child here knows they matter. Jessica Thompson, would you please come up here? There was a roar of applause as Jessica slowly made her way to the stage, her cane tapping softly against the wood floor. She smiled shyly, clearly not expecting the attention. When she reached Linda, the principal gestured toward the curtain. And there's someone here who came a long way to see you. Michael stepped out from behind the curtain. The room erupted. Parents gasped, kids pointed, and for a second Jessica just stared at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then her eyes widened. Michael, she said, her voice half question, half laugh. He grinned. Hey, Jessica, long time no see. The audience chuckled at the understatement. Before she could respond, Michael took the mic. I came here today because I read an article about this incredible teacher, and when I realized it was someone I'd known a long time ago, I knew I had to see her in person. What I learned is that she's been fighting for these kids, giving her time, her heart, and her own money to make sure they have what they need. And then I learned something else, that the program she's built was in danger of being shut down. Jessica blinked rapidly, her lips pressing together. So, Michael continued, I decided that as long as I'm around, that's not going to happen. Starting today, this program is fully funded for the next 5 years. New equipment, more staff, whatever these kids need, they're going to get it. The applause that followed was deafening. Some parents were on their feet, cheering through tears. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head as if she couldn't quite believe it. When the noise died down, she leaned toward the microphone. Michael, I don't even know what to say. You already said something to me once, he replied with a small smile. It was 1981. I asked you to the spring dance, and you said no. The audience laughed, and Jessica covered her face in mock embarrassment. Michael's tone softened. Back then, I thought that moment was a loss. But today, I see it for what it really was, the start of 2 different journeys. And I'm just grateful those journeys crossed again. Jessica lowered the mic and reached out to hug him. It was a gentle, careful embrace, but it carried the weight of decades. When they pulled apart, she whispered, You didn't have to do this. I know, Michael said. That's why I wanted to. For the rest of the assembly, Michael sat beside Jessica, watching as students performed skits, sang songs, and proudly displayed their art. He noticed how the kids lit up whenever she smiled at them, how she spoke to each one by name. Afterward, they walked slowly down the hallway together, past bulletin boards covered in bright construction paper. Do you ever wonder how life might have turned out differently? Jessica asked. Sometimes, Michael admitted. But I think we end up where we're supposed to be. And you ended up exactly where you were needed most. Jessica's eyes glistened. And maybe you did too. They stopped at the school's front doors. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Michael looked at her cane, then back at her. You know, he said with a smirk, there's a dance in Charlotte next month for a charity I'm hosting. This time I'm not taking no for an answer. Jessica laughed, the same bright, open laugh from their high school days. We'll see, Michael. We'll see. The weeks after the assembly felt strangely light for Michael, not because of any trophy, contract, or business deal, but because of something far simpler. He had done something meaningful that wasn't about basketball, endorsements, or headlines. The world, of course, caught wind of it anyway. The Wilmington Gazette ran a follow-up article about the anonymous donor who had saved New Hanover Elementary's special needs program, only for the secret to spill within days. Larger outlets picked up the story, and the narrative spread like wildfire. Michael Jordan quietly funds school program, reconnects with former cheerleader from high school. Reporters called it a heartwarming reunion. Social media dubbed Jessica the woman who once said no to Michael Jordan. Some treated it like a funny footnote in sports history. Others saw it as a reminder that not all good deeds happen in front of cameras. But for Michael, the attention was irrelevant. What mattered was that every time he talked to Linda Harris, he heard the joy in her voice when she described the kids' excitement over their new resources. Smart boards, sensory play equipment, better mobility aids. The program didn't just survive, it thrived. And then there was Jessica. After the assembly, they began talking on the phone once or twice a week. Sometimes about school, sometimes about the old days at Laney High, and sometimes about things that had nothing to do with either. Books she was reading, his golf game, the best fried chicken spots in Wilmington. It wasn't romance, not exactly. It was something quieter but deeper. The steady warmth of 2 people who had seen enough of life to know that companionship didn't always need fireworks. One afternoon, about a month later, Michael drove back to Wilmington. He didn't tell her he was coming. Instead, he showed up at the school during her lunch break with a brown paper bag in hand. I brought sandwiches from Dockside, he said, grinning as she spotted him in the hallway. You didn't have to drive 3 hours for that, she laughed, though her eyes softened. They ate in her classroom, surrounded by colorful posters and student artwork. Between bites, Michael glanced at a framed photo on her desk. Jessica in a wheelchair alongside a group of beaming children at last year's Special Olympics. You ever think about retiring? He asked gently. She shook her head. Not until they make me. I've got kids in this program who've been told no their whole lives. I'm not going to be another no. That sentence stuck with him. It reminded him of the night she turned him down for the dance. Not out of cruelty, but out of choice. She'd been honest. She'd said no because she wanted to, and he had respected it. Now, decades later, she was still holding her ground. D, still choosing her own path, still standing up for what mattered. After lunch, he walked her back to class. The students shouted his name and rushed to high-five him, but the real star of the room was Jessica. She moved slowly, but her presence filled the space in a way that made everyone feel seen. Before leaving, Michael paused at the door. "You know, Jess," he said quietly, "if you'd said yes back in 1981, we might have had one dance and then gone our separate ways. Maybe we wouldn't even be friends now." Jessica smiled, leaning on her cane. "And maybe saying no was the best thing I ever did for you." He chuckled. "It might have been, but I'm glad life gave me another shot." They didn't hug that day, didn't make any grand declarations. He just gave her a nod, the kind athletes give each other after a hard-fought game, a nod that meant respect, understanding, and something unspoken that didn't need to be put into words. In the months that followed, Michael returned to Wilmington several more times, always keeping it low-key. Sometimes he helped with the program's fundraising events, sometimes he just sat in the back of her classroom, watching her work. Each visit reminded him that success wasn't always measured in points or rings. Sometimes it was measured in the quiet, stubborn victories that nobody saw. Jessica's health didn't magically improve. The MS still made certain days hard, but she seemed lighter, more supported, and Michael knew he hadn't just saved a program. He'd reminded someone who had once inspired him that her fight mattered. Life has a way of circling back. The people we think we've lost, to time, distance, or a single fateful no, sometimes reappear, not to rewrite the past, but to give the present a meaning we couldn't have imagined back then. For Michael, the rejection in high school wasn't a wound anymore. It was a starting point. Halt. Proof that not getting what you want can set you on a path towards something better. And for Jessica, the boy she once turned down became the man who helped her keep the promise she made to her students, to never let them hear no when yes could change everything. In the end, the cheerleader and the basketball player didn't become prom royalty, didn't date, didn't fall into some Hollywood romance, but they became something rarer, living reminders that the people who cross our paths can shape us in ways we don't understand until decades later. Sometimes the real victory isn't in winning the game, it's in showing up when it counts.